So welcome. My name is Uma Dinsmore-Tuli, and I'm here on behalf of the Yoga Nidra Network with my colleague from Turtle Island, Yoli Maya.
Hello, friends. My name is Yoli Maya, she whose words are heard. And I'm Sharon from Turtle Island, also known as North America, today with you from the Great Lakes region of so many waterways and freshwater sources and these ancestral lands of the Sauk and the Fox and the Potawatomi peoples and the Kickapoo and the Peoria and so many peoples we don't know. Also, this has been a land that has been inhabited by people for tens of thousands of years. Actually, it's exciting. So thank you. Thanks for inviting me to come chat with you.
Yeah. So it's delightful to be speaking with you from these ancient lands upon which you're seated there, and back here in the Cotswolds in England, in the little hills, and we're talking about the indigenous roots of Yoga Nidra. So I'm going to do a little framing of this because for many people, when you ask, like, what's the history of Yoga Nidra, you get some story that maybe tells you perhaps a Swami discovered it or invented it in India, and that maybe tells you that there's a trademarked version of it, and if you learn that method, that will be it, and you'll be able to do it right. But they might tell you it's kind of rooted in Indian epic poetry, which indeed it is, the Mahabharata. But I've spent some years doing quite a bit of research about this and listening in to people who are wise and listening also to the experiences of Yoga Nidra. And my question is, does not it seem pretty evident that Yoga Nidra has indigenous roots? What do you say to that, Yoli?
Yes. Well, I say a couple of things. First of all, it's a very emphatic yes. Yes, yes, yes. And then like yes with some like fire flames and yes, absolutely. And then we need sort of the secondary like why is it important to acknowledge that? There's all sorts of little reasons. But first and foremost, we will have to describe the way that authority is given to those who hold authority. And so there's a whole system of how fact or truth is validated, particularly in scholastic areas and areas of research. So when we approach this, and I, as an Indigenous person who, yes, comes from a lineage practice and is stamped approved by that lineage practice, that's a type of authority, you know, but that isn't the only type of authorization to speak from. So when we are indoctrinated into the Eurocentric learning model and then the higher learning scholastic model, we have a really rigid structure that we fit in of research, and then how you prove your research. And all you have to do is quote somebody else's research that's in line with the statement you're making. And what you're quoting could be total rubbish. So I could be the author of said rubbish, and you come along and you write your thing, and all you have to do is reference me. And now my rubbish has informed now your thing, which may be rubbish, you know, and my rubbish just got validated because somebody...
I'd like to add in here that we're speaking to you today as people who do know how to play this game. You know what I mean? Like often when you get these interviews, like say so-and-so professor of such and such at the University of so-and-so, and I would like to emphasize that there is some value in the kind of studies that inform our understanding, and there are other kinds of knowledge, and that Yoli holding your master's in can you describe your
I have a master's in comparative religious ethics.
Thank you. So with the master's in comparative religious ethics and a PhD in communications, I mean, it's like we're able to look into this from the perspective of seeing that there may be some value to some of it, but it only gets you so far, and then you either get mired in the rubbish or you get a bit stuck. So this was my experience writing this encyclopedia of Yoga Nidra. I got to the place where I was like, I had gone into chapter and verse of all the people who said they owned Nidra and where they got it from and the infighting, and did a fabulous, well documented scholarly piece on that. And when I showed it to Yoli, she was like, well, yeah, this is all very good, but like, how is this going to serve the real expansion of understanding that comes in the context of a liberatory way of knowing, a decolonized way of knowing? So it was Yoli's inspiration. I went deeper into the prehistory, and that's why I ended up with this question saying, what I see is that there are deep indigenous roots in many different places in the world that
many different places in the world. That's the key statement. And we really should, like, before we really just go right in the heart of that, we really should also highlight the South Asian diasporic project, because we support it. For South Asian voices to locate their practices and the origins of their practices in their culture, because of the whitewashing of the yogic teachings in the West, and the Westerners who came to South Asia, and East Asia for that matter too, and took these teachings and then put them through the very conservative Christian filter and put them through the scholastic filter, and churn them out and put them through the capitalistic, later on the neoliberal filters. And then all of a sudden we just get, like very, very thin white women in very scantily clad clothes doing contortion. And that's being sold as yoga, but you're blissed out. Let's not forget about that, kind of thing. So we want to honor the work that's being done in the South Asian diasporic community to locate all the voices and all the different peoples and all the different genders in the context of the South Asian origins of many of the modern day yogic practices. Now, what that project does not include is that Vedic culture is not indigenous culture of South Asia. There were peoples, very organized peoples, advanced peoples, who lived in that region tens of thousands of years before the influx of your Aryans and their subsequent technologies and languages and their amazing weave of culture. But predating that's where we're locating ourselves right now.
I think
the ancient global network of the sacred dreamscape.
The ancient global network of the sacred dreamscape is where it's at when we try to understand just how potent and how needed this practice of Yoga Nidra is right now. That's why we're banging on about it, because actually it's deeply called for. Like, will you stop, humans? Will you rest? Will you listen to the earth? And will you connect? And what I can track, and what I'm hoping we can track together, is that when we go back, through that Indian epic poetry, deep into the South Asian roots, what I found was the presence of Ma, the presence of this power of rest, honored. And she kind of remains present in like the Puranas and the folk tales and the kind of fringes of all of that culture that's actually living in the peoples, in the oral traditions of the peoples. And she shows up as this really powerful force who can put you to sleep and send you to dream, and nobody can resist her. And you just bow on your knees to her because she's hugely powerful. And that figure, I think, is deeply rooted in like ancient history, that like we find written versions of it, but like you have to go back into the oral traditions to find out was really like underneath there. So
and when we say underneath, I see it's basically background, right? So it's the track that's always going in the background, and it never stops, because it is in essence the background consciousness as it is. So yeah, I don't want to go too far down there, because then I get on like tangent things and I have a hard time coming back.
No, if I bring us back to this idea that there are in many places in the world a global dreamscape and global technologies, rituals,
Yes.
ceremonies, processes for entering into the state that we call Yoga Nidra,
Yes.
and which is named that from the South Asian traditions. But would you like to speak about other places and other ways to enter that?
Well, it's every place.
Yeah.
It's basically all indigenous people have this identical technology, and how they access it is through the meditative ritual practice. So, right now we have the Yoga Nidra, the technology in its well-defined steps and stages. We have a description of this body via the Panchakosha model, the 5 sheath model, where we can see like where we're interacting and what we're resonating, which layers multi-layers, we're resonating on with the technology at the time. We have these steps to go in the involutionary process and then to the evolutionary process. In the indigenous context, everything's ritualized, right? And so the elements of your soul retrieval, your shamanic journeying, your dream, your sacred dreaming, I think, Australian Aboriginal. And I want to preface, this is not a research area of mine. Like, I have not gone and done the scholastic research, even using oral source as primary source, as one must do when they're researching anything indigenous. Your primary source has to be oral. Your secondary sources are your written sources. And so my perspective is, this is what I've lived and this is what I was raised in. And then when I started interacting formally with the South Asian yogic context of Yoga Nidra, I was like, oh, yeah, we know this. Like, this is when we dream. This is when we, and we still have stages because it mirrors sleep rest and how you drop in, and go deeper. Now, interestingly, what I think is really important with the indigenous practice of Yoga Nidra, and the difference between that and shamanic led practices, the shaman acts as the intermediary between worlds. And it's also about you getting back safely from where the journey goes. But Nidra in the indigenous context is a self-contained time machine or spaceship. Wherever you're heading, are you heading out to the edges of the universe? Are we heading back in time? Are we going future in time? Are we going to hit basically multiple points in time, because we're not limited in the Nidrascape by the limitations of our conceptualizations of time, that we only exist in one moment of time, the present moment. And so you don't need an intermediary. You can guide yourself into those spaces. And even like, so is the person leading the Nidra, let's say the Nidra is led, is that person then sort of acting like the shaman and taking you between worlds? They are not. They're not taking you between the worlds. You are going, but you are always 100% in your agency, which is why Yoga Nidra is like yet another reason why Yoga Nidra is such a phenomenal practice when we're talking about trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive, trauma-inclusive practices in our daily traumatizing world, that anything up until this moment that had, a priest, an imam, an interpreter, a shaman, a guru, a guide, these are all systems that are now flawed. Why are they flawed? Because humans are flawed. So we just can't not be human. We got to insert all our insecurities and needs for control and scarcity and, all those things. And so we're learning. We're just not at our smartest moment here, and then here you've got all these indigenous people holding this knowledge for us. And so really important thing is even in the South Asian context, in the South Asian storytelling, every time a great revealer, came along, man, woman, gender fluid space alien, they would come, they would deliver their teachings, and then they would keep the essence teaching with the Nagas, right? Who are the Nagas? The Nagas are the indigenous people of the land. So the best, most accurate place to do your research, to find your source of information, is actually in the oral tradition of indigenous people. But look at the complicating factor that we have of the programs of colonization, erasure, and genocide.
Yeah.
So if you're wondering why it's hard to find the sources, or why we haven't heard this before, or like, where are we coming with this? Well, you're pretty hard pressed to find the people who know these things anymore.
Yeah, because the systematic erasure and of the knowledge and removals of the people and disconnection from these is so, like, it's a global project, that the remaining connections we have are deeply precious. This is what I'm saying, like, to honor and respect what's present, and to, it's as if we're seeking with a respectful desire to actually honor and reconnect back to the source. And that's why I was going to ask you to speak. You've shared with me some of the stories and the experiences from the teachings that you received as you were growing up, almost as a child, in song and story. And I wondered if you would speak a little about that, how that relates to the Nidra state, because I remember we're talking about how the oral tradition is important, but the other council fires were here before ours was a text that you gifted to me that I found deeply rich in dream experiences, where the creation myth is revealed through dream and through conscious entering into sleep. But I wondered if you just, from the Seneca people's teachings, you might want to share some of those experiences.
Sure. And it's a lot of this is also, centering the body technology as opposed to the prioritizing of the cognitive thinking brain. Indigenous style is really not about this cognitive thinking brain being at the top. It's one of many faculties, is one of many tools that we have, but it really is, again, the modern scientific construct that prioritizes believing, seeing is believing, right? That there has to always be a proof. The indigenous context is the exact opposite, where believing is seeing. So what did I do with my son this past weekend as we reclaimed Indigenous Peoples Day? Well, I exercised our birthright to take him into the forest to continue to create experiences for him to learn how to listen. So, when one is gifted with the opportunity to learn in an Indigenous way as a child, up until the age of 5, you're just taught to listen. How to listen to the trees, the stones, the clouds, that like everything has a language as you are forming language, right? And spoken language. And then from like a general kind of phase of age, 5 till puberty, to let's say 12 or 13, you explore your unique gifts, your resonances. But it's not until after puberty that then you hone those gifts and also learn about being an adult participant in the community and the interdependent responsibilities and duties that come along with that, including the duty of showing up as your best self, who is rested. Like, side note, the expectation is not that you show up as this frazzled, haggard, anxious filled thing that's about to crumble. You have a duty to actually show up as your like best version. Now, the way that when you learn how to listen, then everything has a language of the clouds, a language of the stones, a language of the plants. And you learn that if you, for example, want to know the medicine of a plant, then you will commune with that plant in multiple ways. You'll meditate with the plant, you'll talk with the plant, you'll listen with the plant, you'll draw the plant, you'll have a sensory experience with the plant. But ultimately your body, like, you'll have this interrelated communion with the plant. Now, the spirit of the plant has to invite you into that communion. You don't get to barge into essentially the energy body of the plant. The plant invites you in. And once you have fully become the plant, you then can access that plant medicine. And what's really cool is you can also access that plant medicine, yes, the plant materia itself, the plant materia in some sort of stored form, salve, tincture, liqueur, this one, that one. Or you could just simply access that spirit signature, the energetic signature of the plant, and apply it as you would the physical plant material itself. That's Nidra, where you're now in the essence of the experience. You're not burdened or held in the limitations of the physical form. You are now in a far more limitless space that is in between worlds, because now you and the plant have now made you're meeting in an in-between space. And it's like a melding that's happening. It's a third space, but the space was always there because the background consciousness, the space holding the elements, is always there. So what is the plant but a conglomerate of elemental substance? What am I but a conglomerate of elemental substance? What is happening in the communion of that? We are now in the harmonizing of our elemental substances held in the same universal Akash space element in our communion. So what is the project right now? Like, as you're describing it, Uma, it's reclamation. It's repurposing and remodeling. We're in a moment of dismantling so that we can then take these building materials. So we have to unlock the bonds that are around the teachings, the chains and the systems. Why we're referencing these systems, these colonial systems, because that's part of the silencing. It's part of the distancing. right? Let's think about like the Native North American peoples here on Turtle Island and how they were very distanced away. They live in very outskirt places if they have dedicated reservation spaces. You don't find reservations in the middle of cities, even though like where those cities have cropped up is still native land, unceded and occupied sovereign land, right? But it's about pushing it away, inaccessibility. So the sheer delight, the pleasure that one can derive from the fact that your body is the vehicle. And you actually don't need anything other than this body, and then a simple technique that mirrors the structure of the universe. That's Yoga Nidra. It is universal, which again is why we actually do it a disservice by only locating it in the South Asian tradition.
Absolutely. I'd just like to echo what you said, that actually that process and then the nature of the experience in the Nidra state is mirroring that process of evolution, dissolution, and reformation, which is why it's so powerfully healing. You know, it's like, you name it, you go in there with that, whatever it is, condition, distress, whatever, and actually experience the nature of Yoga Nidra in its sense of how it feels to be in that liminal space. Then you're actually occupying a space of really deep healing. That's freedom. It's a freedom space.
Quantum healing. You're healing according to the mathematics of fractal epistemology. It's exponential multiplication and division. Because remember, like when somebody's in a Nidra experience, a dream experience, a shamanic experience, you know, even experiences that are induced with psychotropic plants, which is a whole side note. Have you noticed how much their bodies contract? Right? There'll be spontaneous contractions. Some people contract a lot, right? Because it's two parts of this. It's expansion and contraction. And so some people are then going to complete cycles of contraction, and some people are cycling through cycles of expansion, and then some people are doing both, like in different places in their bodies. And so it's not just fractal epistemology of multiplication, it's also fractal epistemology of division, where people can support contractive patterns in the body and heal.
Oh, I like you see what it is that's revealed when we start exploring these different ways of knowing that like reflect and mirror the whole nature of creation. This is one way of understanding what we mean by that term, fractal epistemology. It's like a way of knowing, a way of accessing wisdom and understanding that has these patterns of reflection, where even in the tiniest experience, like I see this happens even in like a 15-minute Nidra experience, that people will go into that little tiny space, and it might just be a fraction of a moment when they're gone and in there, and it can feel in terms of time like forever, but it also in terms of the level of healing that arises, like lifetimes of distress are kind of like somehow reflected into a different way of being, and they come back feeling like a whole different person. Like I see this over and over again, and what you've described, I love to just like follow through with this as we kind of try and wrap all this enormous thing up, is that the nature of the experiences that people are having are massively diverse, right? So you can deliver the same kind of Nidra experience to a group of 50 people, and there will be 50 different responses. You can even take that same kind of process, say, oh, I know that Nidra process, and you can do it in the same place at the same time the next day, and it will be a different thing altogether. So I see in the nature of its massive multiplicity, and mutability evidence of Ma, like in terms of like it's the presence of the deep feminine life force at work in lots of different ways. But sometimes you say that and people go, what do you mean Ma's in Nidra? But like the essence of the power of sleep from the South Asian way of describing this, the Nidra Shakti, the power of sleep, is manifest in all these different forms that you've been speaking about.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's so much more we could we could open up, but this feels like a good tidbit to chew on for today. And generating more questions, getting curious, feeling into things. So thank you for the opportunity of riffing with you a bit and planting a few seeds there, and there's always more.
There is always more, and I absolutely honor and celebrate what you've shared with us from your vast experience of Nidra, from the traditions of the South Asian Tantra and the matrilineal traditions, and your traditions in the rooted lands of your native land of Turtle Island, and how it's really a great privilege to be able to hear all of this woven together so elegantly. So I'm thanking Yoli Maya, and looking forward to sharing more Nidra practices together on our on the adventures we embark on in sharing Yoga Nidra. How can people find you, Yoli, if they want to connect?
So I try to keep the website updated, yogawithyoli.com, and then Instagram is at Yoli Yogini, like that, Yoli Maya on Facebook. And these days you can join me for decolonization toolkits or Tantra for Women study, and as things evolve.
This is good. And so I'm inviting you to connect with Yoli. And also I look forward to connecting with her on our Yoga Nidra Network adventures, where Yoli, amongst other things, is sharing on our Total Yoga Nidra teacher and facilitator training courses, where we explore some of these issues amongst many others, offering practical access routes for like creative and responsive ways to share the magic and precious tool of Total Yoga Nidra. And you find us at the yoganidranetwork.org. Thank you so much for listening. It's a delight and a pleasure. I'm going to say goodbye and thank you.
Thank you.
Very